Let's talk about some heretics and mutants, demon engines and veterans of the Long War, with a tier list overview of the Chaos Space Marines with some of the strongest and weakest choices in the army. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Chaos, and in this video I thought we'd do a tier list for Chaos Space Marines, talking through each and every unit in the index and how they're ranking up against the others in 10th edition so far. For this one, as with a fair few of the other tier lists that are made for other factions recently, I thought it would be fun to talk through each unit in order and roughly how I think they stack up power-wise for the points. Now I've got the full 10th edition rules out, and people have been starting playing games of 10th edition in earnest, Chaos Space Marines having a few good tournament performances, perhaps overall feeling like a fairly well-balanced faction in Warhammer 40k, not at the bottom of the pile, but not stomping all the tournaments and winning everything. This video is partly made by a community vote by you guys, plus with a few of my own opinions. Between the vote and me nudging a few units up or down a little, I've sorted the Chaos Space Marine units into 4 rough tiers of power level for a very rough appraisal of current strength. As per always with these, the usual caveats apply. Tier lists are a bit arbitrary and some things could definitely be ranked higher or lower in certain army lists, and I feel like there's quite a few units that could have happily been in one tier or another. I'll talk through those at the time. Feel free to let me know if you think any of these units are underrated gems or deserve to be a little bit higher or lower. It'll be interesting to hear any cool combos down in the comments as well. I feel like Chaos Space Marines, with marking every unit and having different stratagems and leaders, are perhaps one of the factions with more synergy than some out there now. In any case though, let's jump straight into it. We'll start out with Tier 4. These are the units that I'd consider a little bit on the weaker side for Chaos Space Marines at the moment. I think these all have issues and compare kind of badly to other things elsewhere in the army. First up, we've got the Plague Marines, either 100 points or 200 for 10. Kind of underwhelming on the stat line side, with the loss of Disgustingly Resilient. They can be at least somewhat shooty and fighty, but they lack a whole ton of support that you might be able to get elsewhere in the Death Guard Codex. Things like the supporting characters for them, like the Feated Virion members, some of which are quite good, and generally being considered a kind of underwhelming datasheet now that they've lost Disgustingly Resilient. I feel like it's rare that Chaos players are really going to get better value out of these than other things. I'd probably be tempted by any of the other Cult Marines more, or just standard Legionaries. The Helldrake I think could be kind of interesting if it was costed a fair bit lower, but at 205 points I think that's just far too much really. At least it's one of the flyers that can start on the board with hover mode, and it can move 20 inches in a turn, which does mean that it gets to grips with enemy units a lot faster. But still, when it's 205 points, I just don't think its damage is good enough to justify its include in most armies, even if the utility is kind of nice. I feel like this guy could happily have something like a 30 or 40 point drop. Perhaps in a similar sort of category is the Lord Discordant, perhaps one of the standout units out of 9th edition 40k with all sorts of massive character combos that you could do with him. He's now significantly more expensive at 220 points for some reason, has lost the ability to stop himself being targeted by things, so he can be directly shot now, but hasn't really gained any significant amount of durability for that loss. His damage output is far lower with the loss of access to things like Flames of Spite from 9th, and even being skewed to kill vehicles, which are very prevalent in 10th edition, he just doesn't really do enough for his damage or defense. Again, could have a massive points decrease and still just remain okay. Vashtor the Archifane again is kind of similar, not a whole load of damage and defense for 225 points, a little bit harder to kill, and gives out a buff to demon vehicles of a +1 strength to their attacks, which I guess could be kind of handy for something like Forge Fiends, but +1 strength is just very unreliable as to whether it's really going to do much. Against a lot of targets it just won't even improve your wound roll. Otherwise I just think he generally competes poorly against the other demon princes, which aren't perhaps significantly easier to kill than him. I think for the points cost have kind of similar melee utility as well, particularly with their special rules. Kind of surprising he didn't get a little bit more love in 10th edition after he'd had a datasheet that was so underwhelming in 9th. The Lion definitely came through the change a bit better than Vashtor did, I think. Next we've got the Traitor Enforcer, 65 points to give a little bit of melee muscle and some leadership things to a Traitor Guardsman squad. Their combat damage isn't terrible and the leadership things are kind of okay, but they're just not really a character choice that you'd really ever want for a Traitor Guardsman squad, basically kind of being a cultist equivalent that wants to be cheap and effective standing on objectives, just paying a small premium over the cultists for better armour and some special weapons. Doubling the cost of the squad to make them into a slightly mediocre melee threat as well just isn't really the way that's going to be sensible to go. You're almost certainly better with just a second Traitor Guardsman squad if you want them for that role. The Felgor Beastmen were a unit that I thought was kind of interesting on their datasheet, but again have just got a points cost that's far too high at 95 points. Kind of a shame as having scout models in a Chaos Space Marine army is pretty useful for a little bit of midfield presence, and they are at least somewhat tough at toughness 4 and a 5+ save. Their combat damage is just pretty bad though, with only 2 attacks hitting on a 4 and 0 AP damage 1. They definitely could be an interesting unit just as more chaff to push forward at the enemy, but would need to cost a significant amount less than this. The Noxleth Crown is 125 points. This one gives you an aura of a 4+ invulnerable save to units within 9 inches. It does have a small shooting attack, but just really not a lot else for 125 points. I feel like this one is maybe a little bit more playable in some armies, compared with a fair few of the other options in this tier perhaps. If you can have it covering a bunch of units with that 4+ invulnerable, at least for a few turns, it could perhaps be just about worth the value. I think a lot of the time though, if you just want an aura of a 4+ invulnerable save, you're probably better off getting it via Abaddon the Despoiler instead of this. At least you can get that on the move. And at least a few of the Chaos Gunline units don't really care about the invulnerable save as much as some armies might. Things like Forge Fiends and Obliterators already get a 5+, and they might even not care too much about the invul in the first place if they have cover. Still though, not entirely useless, again could be good if it was costed less. Finally, we've got Chaos Spawn, which are 80 points for a set of 2 models. Really very expensive indeed, and I don't think that the buffs that the Spawn got in 10th edition really made up for that. Compared with when they were 25 points each, their damage and defense had just gone down on a per point basis, and also not being able to field them in individual irritating squads is a bit sad as well. These guys are costed surprisingly higher than a lot of the other equivalents, say like the Thousand Suns and the World Eater Spawn, which you get for 65 points and not 80. Moving on, we get to the tier 3 units. I'd say that most of these are fairly usable mid-tier units, overall not as standout as a bunch of the other things in the army I'd say, perhaps slightly more niche choices in competitive lists than being run literally all the time. First up we've got the Raptors, which are perhaps the single unit that I would have been most tempted to put in tier 2. I could have happily either ranked them right at the top of tier 3 or probably lower down tier 2. 95 points or 190 for a unit of 10 jump pack marines. They do move pretty fast, they do have deep strike, can be handy enough for objectives, and they do also have some battle shock shenanigans as well with a -1 leadership on the go. I still say the damage output isn't really all that exciting. They definitely feel like a bit more of a bully unit for enemy light infantry or just a utility unit to try and fly around hoovering up tactical objective points. I feel like they're very usable but probably in at least fairly small numbers and not spamming loads of them. Next we've got the Rubik Marines at the same cost at 95 points or 190. These guys could be an interesting enough alternative to standard legionaries. Okay toughness with the 5+ invulnerable save. They get objective control 2 natively on their datasheet, even if you're running them outside of Thousand Suns, and their anti-infantry firepower isn't too bad with the Soul Reaper cannon built in, plus the Zinch keyword for 5+ lethal hits if you need to punch up a bit. Overall I feel like they're handy enough objective holders, if again like the Death Guard Plague Marines lacking some synergies with characters and things they might be able to get in Thousand Suns. Next up, we've got Warp Talons at 130 points or 260. To me, these guys seem pretty well balanced with the Raptors, again moving quickly with a whole bunch of Strength 5, AP-2 melee and twin linked, so fairly general purpose and can deal with some things with fairly high saves. As well as their improved combat, they also get to force Desperate Escape on units falling back from them, which could be kind of nice for shenanigans and might mean that your opponent just can't afford to fall back with certain units, plus also being a fast unit that can jump around the board quickly and do objective things. Again, a unit that could have probably ranked at the top end of tier 3 or the lower end of tier 2. Next up, we've got the Khorne Berserkers at 115 points or 230 for a big squad of 10. Objective control 2 and a whole raft of AP-1 melee attacks with those Berserker glaives, and you do get some slightly more quality melee hidden in the squad with their Eviscerators as well with the strength 8 and damage 2. I'd say for standard Chaos Space Marines they perhaps struggle to compete with a few of the other melee options in the book, perhaps particularly Chosen, who are the same points cost but get 3 wounds and AP-2 combat, plus some other advantages. I'd say they're usable, but compared with the alternatives, people aren't going to take them quite as much as the other options on offer. Next up, there's the Chaos Bikers at 95 points or 190 for 6 of them. These guys pay a bit of a premium for their speed, fast moving interference with some special weapons and a power fist on your sergeant. Not bad for a slightly fast moving unit to get around the board and get where it needs to, though I don't think their damage output is really that spectacular for just over 30 points per model. I can't help but think that you might be better off with Raptors for them, which interact with terrain a little bit better. The Traitor Guardsman squad is 70 points for a unit of 10 of them, basically cultists with a 5+ save, objective control 2, and a fair bit more choice of special weapons. You can take a bunch of plasma guns or something should you wish to. I do kind of like the Traitor Guardsman squad. For 70 points I think that they're pretty decent on objectives. You also automatically get the benefit of cover against enemy attacks if you are on a point, making them kind of nice for surviving enemy shooting attacks, particularly with a little bit less AP in the game these days. I do feel like they're just a bit squeezed between the value of the cultist mob or the accursed cultist though, either having the one choice that's just very cheap and does the job for a bit less than these guys, or the annoying regeneration that the accursed cultist can do, actually bringing some fairly serious combat. Perhaps quite a nice one if you've just got 15 points left over and you've taken a cultist squad, you could upgrade one to one of these. Next up, we've got the rather brutal combat Mauler Fiend, 155 points, and really quite strong generalist melee that can threaten the toughest things at the game, all the way up at strength 14. I feel like Slanesh could be kind of interesting for advance and charge with a stratagem for that one, particularly given that it re-rolls both advance and charge rolls, so it can go quite a long way in one turn. I think for what it does, it's pretty reasonable. Again, one of the units that I'd rank towards the top end of this tier. Throwing one towards the enemy does basically give them something that they need to deal with, and it's got a reasonable enough defensive profile. Perhaps a bit of a distraction Carnifex of a unit. The Vindicator's got a very nice and very threatening new gun profile with that enormous Demolisher Cannon with strength 14 and d6 plus 1 shots, a little bit more reliable than it was before, plus being able to fire blast in melee and with no penalty to boot. The price tag of 210 points though definitely takes the shine off that a bit. You are paying quite a lot for such generalist and dangerous firepower, and it still is a little bit on the swingy side. Probably a 1 on the number of shots or the damage at the key time could still hurt you quite a bit. The Lord of Skulls recently got a points bump, going up from 420 to 480, quite a nerf there. Despite that though, I think it's still at least fairly interesting. A Titanic towering vehicle with heavy firepower can give it some nice options for what it can shoot. Sometimes it might be able to fire against enemies that are normally hidden with windows or ruins that are a little bit smaller than some. And of course, if it does get to combat, it's going to do some serious damage. Maybe just the slight issue if it gets screened out by anything. I don't think it really needed the points nerf though. I think it was kind of fine where it was, just maybe copping a bit of a penalty for the sins of other armies like Imperial Knights. I guess at least to its credit, it's a fairly strong option for targeting with any available stratagems as well. Quite a big chunky unit that you can get a lot of value if you do target it with anything with, plus other focal buffs like the Warpsmith. Next we've got the Predator tanks, which are both kind of fine really. 135 points for the Annihilator or 130 for the Destructor, tailoring a bit to either anti-tank or anti-infantry with their special rules, either re-rolling damage results of 1 or getting extra AP respectively. And so perhaps the Annihilator is a little bit more standout with a lot of vehicles going around in 10th edition, but in terms of heavy Chaos Space Marine firepower, I think more people are probably going to be looking at things like Forge Fiends or maybe Obliterators perhaps. I think they probably outclass these guys on an overall basis. The Defiler's quite a nice all-rounder, very strong melee and a decent amount of firepower as well, but again it comes with a very high points cost like the Vindicator, all the way up at 210. And again it does have the issue of competing with other demon engines like Venom Crawlers, Mauler Fiends and Forge Fiends. Point for point I think it does struggle against those at least a little bit. Next up we've got a trio of generic characters, the Warpsmith, Dark Apostle and Sorcerer, all of which I think are very usable, and depending on the unit definitely could be the right choice, but maybe won't see as much play I think compared with at least a few of the other choices in the army. I'd say out of these I'd actually probably rank the Warpsmith as one of the best. If you are playing a very demon engine heavy army like say a bunch of Forge Fiends or some of the other options available, having one of them around to repair D3 wounds and make 1+1 to hit each turn is overall quite nice. He does bring a little bit of his own personal combat threat as well, and can mess with enemy vehicles that get a little bit too close. And it's not really all that many points either at 70. Perhaps just feels a little bit on the borderline worth side though compared with investing more points in more vehicles. The Dark Apostle for 85 points gives you +1 to wound in melee, which is fairly nice. The Dark Disciples can tank some hits for your unit if needed. Seems usable enough with Chosen, or perhaps a unit of Accursed Cultists, but again in stiff competition with other things like the Dark Commune for the Cultists, or perhaps Chaos Lords for Chosen with their free stratagems. Definitely not bad though, +1 to wound is pretty meaningful. Lastly for these three, there's the Sorcerer at 60 points as well. Really quite a cheap character that gives his unit a +1 to hit and a little bit of psychic shooting. Again, maybe could be okay for a Chosen squad perhaps. I feel like Legionaries probably don't bring quite enough might to justify having a +1 to hit for 60 points. I guess could be an interesting enough unit to bear an enhancement within a squad. Finally, I've also chosen to rank a bunch of named characters here as well. Harken Worldclaimer is a little bit pricier than most of the other characters at 120 points, but I think he's reasonable enough for Raptors. I feel like perhaps one of the biggest deals about him is that he makes a really quite punchy mortal wound hit with a big squad hitting the target. You could be getting an average of 5 or 6 mortal wounds out of a full Raptor squad there, and that does make them a lot more threatening to mid-sized enemy units. He also comes with a bit of precision melee as well, plus some fun spear attacks, and can make Raptor Battle Shock a little bit more useful, as it means that you get to test Battle Shock if they've taken any casualties at all, which maybe could make the unit actually have a higher chance of failing and losing objective control, or potentially having to take Desperate Escape when falling back. Huron Blackheart's very cheap at 80 points. He does a few slightly random and different things with extra objective control, redeploying units, though unfortunately before the first turn is known, and then a once per game reactive move as well. None of those things are awful, but I feel like he's going to be a bit of a niche choice, just doesn't really feel anywhere near as focused as most of the rest. Finally, Cypher's 105 points. He's got one of those rules where he messes with an opponent's stratagem to make it cost more for future uses. That could be really quite powerful for certain key ones for the enemy, and otherwise he can do a little bit of reactive shooting provided he's up close within 12 inches and has lone operative to keep him safe. Overall though, I feel like he maybe just doesn't really have quite enough shooting threat and defense to make him that worth it, and not quite as much reactive shooting power as say a Necron Hexmark Destroyer. Still though, definitely not unusable. Lone operative is pretty powerful for objective shenanigans and things, and he could give a medium infantry unit a bit of a nasty surprise if they do try and shoot him up close. Moving on to tier 2 now, and here are some of the units that are rated as genuinely quite strong Chaos units. Perhaps a little bit more likely to be cropping up in tournament lists, though I still rate a few choices in the Codex to be a bit more powerful than this. First up, we've got the standard Chaos Legionaries, really quite a general purpose squad with objective control 2, either 100 points for 5 or 200 for 10, and they do get a fair few special weapons, heavy weapons, and some combat stuff all built into the squad. Maybe a little bit of a generalist unit and not enormously focused. I probably wouldn't expect people to be absolutely spamming loads and loads of these, but their big rerolls to wound against enemy units on objectives is actually reasonably powerful with heavy weapons and things, and they do have more options for character support than most of the other units in the Codex, being at least a fairly interesting choice for a bunch of HQs. Between that and the objective control, I feel like you could probably justify a couple of units of them. Could be a unit that you could use in different ways depending on the opponent and what they're bringing. Next up, we've got the Cultist Mob, 55 points for 10 Chaos Chaff, or 110 points for 20. These guys are very cheap, don't really do all that much on the damage front, but do get the sticky objectives rule, so it can be kind of handy to move up and lock down a point, or even just sit on a home field objective, knowing that it won't get lost even if they get battle shocked. They can chip in with a few special weapons with the Stubber, Flamethrower and Grenade Launcher, and could be interesting with a few different ways that they can get invulnerable saves to make them significantly tougher, either being close-ish to Abaddon, the Dark Commune, or maybe the Noctilith Crown, though I'd probably say that high investment and vulnerable saves are probably better served on the Accursed Cultists. Speaking of which, I think that Accursed Cultists are definitely an interesting unit, 95 points for 8 of them, including the 3 Torments, or 190 points for 16. Their toughness is fairly good, with the toughness 4 and 6+ feel no pain. You could alternate taking different shots on either mutants or torments depending on what it's best at killing. They can regenerate models in the command phase as well if you don't wipe out the entire unit. Quite nice for shenanigans such as getting the unit to be very slightly closer to the enemy they want to charge, or potentially just flipping objectives from one player's control to the next. And it's really quite powerful. They can do that in both players' command phase, not just one. I still wouldn't really say their damage output is massively standout without further buffs, but the Torment combat isn't too bad with a bunch of attacks at strength 5 and damage 2, so could at least bully some other enemy medium to light infantry perhaps. They do have objective control too, which is quite nice for objectives now, though they aren't fearless anymore. And as mentioned, just like the regular cultists, they combo really well with anything that could give them an invulnerable save, Abaddon the Despoiler or the Dark Commune perhaps being the most obvious ways. Overall I think they're fairly solid. I'd either rate them right towards the top of tier 2 or perhaps lowish tier 1, maybe more towards the latter if you actually buy some support for them and make them a bit tougher. If the opponent can't quite kill them, then they could be seriously annoying with the sheer amount of models that can spring back up. Next up, for 135 points, we've got a squad of 5 Havocs, fairly focused heavy weapon fire support depending on what you want, and make quite nice use of the different dark packs depending on their target. If you need a few more focused las cannons, then you can take a squad of 4 of them, or you could go very big on anti-infantry shooting with the Reaper chain cannons perhaps. Not caring at all about modifiers is pretty nice as well as being able to move and shoot without any penalty, unlike a lot of other shooting units. For sheer firepower, I'd say they're probably a bit outcompeted by the Forge Fiend and perhaps Obliterators as well, but probably not by much, and I still think that they're very usable. Moving on, we've got the Noise Marines, kind of weirdly the cheapest Chaos Space Marines that you can field at the moment, 85 points for 5 or 170 for 10, so they're only 17 points per model. I think that's really not too bad given that the average guy spams out a bunch of strength 5 shots, 3 of them with the sonic blasters, plus you get the free blastmaster built into the unit, which is still quite a nice general purpose weapon, even if it's not going to be quite as hot at punching up against tanks. I think if you just wanted to take a standard squad of Chaos Space Marines and just have them fire out at range, then these guys would be fairly solid competition for that, just doing the same job for a bit cheaper. They don't really have anywhere near as much flexibility with what characters can join them, or obviously what mark they can take as their Slanesh. Perhaps a bit of a disadvantage there, though you could make a fighter unit with chainswords of them if you wanted to, maybe headed up by Lucius the Eternal. The Land Raider I think is interesting at 255 points, a massive improvement compared with 9th edition. It's pretty tough at toughness 12, a 2+ save and 16 wounds. You will need focused anti-tank to do that much to it, and the Soul Shatter las cannons can return fire in kind and be a pretty significant threat to enemy heavies of their own. The big improvements compared with 9th edition though are delivering units to melee at very good distances, as opposed to being almost about as slow or slower than just having your units foot slog. And also the fact that you don't really care as much about having it locked up in melee, as vehicles can fire out of combat now. Overall I think it's pretty usable with a few of the different Chaos melee units, a big investment to get them a very long threat range, but should give a dangerous unit a very good chance of getting straight to the front. Next up, we've got the Venom Crawler at 140 points. I feel like the Venom Crawler is a kind of interesting one in that it maybe is still a little bit on the niche side. It's got Strength 6, AP -1 and Damage 2, but a whole load of shots, so it's very good at dealing with some profiles like 2 wound Space Marines or Toughness 3 Hordes, but will be at least kind of dreadful if it needs to fire against Toughness 12 vehicles or something. I suppose you could Dark Pact for some lethal hits. I'd say overall though, out of the Demon engines, it's probably one of the better ones. Nice volume fire and combat capable against things like medium infantry. As we mentioned with a fair few other things on the list though, I feel like Forge Fiends are probably going to outcompete it as a first choice for a lot of people's armies. The Chaos Rhino is 85 points, and again is genuinely useful to deliver squads onto objectives or shooting units to deliver their damage output. I feel like Rhinos have gained really quite a lot since 9th edition with the get out after moving rule, a lot better toughness against incidental small arms or enemy units that aren't equipped for killing vehicles in melee, plus can self-repair a bit and chip in with a few Havoc launcher shots as well. I think it's a solid enough choice for units like Chosen Noise Marines or delivering Legionaries to scrap over objectives. Next up, we've got the two different flavours of Demon Prince. The foot one is 180 points, gives you an aura of getting the benefit of cover, though I guess it is kind of easy to get that in 10th edition on a bunch of units, and otherwise just has some very nice combat capability with some personal rerolls built in. Both flavours are really quite tanky now with their 2+ saves and their 4+ invulnerable saves range and melee, but that is kind of balanced out by being able to be directly shot. The Demon Prince with wings is a bit more expensive at 195 points. The Slanesh version with their Elixir relic is quite nice. The Feel No Pain type save gives you a better chance of actually making combat, and if you can get there without taking too much damage, you get some fairly hefty mortal wound impact hits as well. That alone could be enough to wipe out entire small squads in its own right. Maybe a little bit harder to advance up the board while remaining safe though now, as the wings don't allow you to just go through ruined walls anymore, it has to go round. The Master of Executions is 80 points for solid enough melee with devastating wounds and precision. I feel like just for his raw stat line alone, then 80 points maybe isn't the most exciting thing in the world, but he can actually give a squad a surprising amount of damage output if they're targeting anything that's depleted. He gives his unit 4 rerolls to hit if the enemy target is below its starting strength, and 4 rerolls to wound as well if it's below half strength, which could add up to a fairly phenomenal damage increase. I feel like he could be a unit that pairs kind of well with a bit of shooting. Maybe just make sure that you take down one model from the squad he's just about to charge, and then get 4 reroll to hit, maybe fishing for any of those critical hits on 5s, perhaps getting auto wounds from that. Lucius the Eternal is 95 points, he grants fights first to either Legionaries or Noise Marines. He's got a fairly nice amount of combat with 8 attacks at Strength 5, AP 2, Damage 2 and Precision, and has a fun special rule which he deals damage to the enemy when he dies, just a small chance to stand back up and live up to his name as being eternal. Fights first really is quite a powerful special rule. It is maybe a bit unfortunate for him though that he is locked to leading those 2 unit choices as opposed to say something like Chosen, which I think would be kind of better. Next up, the Exalted Champion is 70 points. He gives you +1 to hit at range and in melee, some okay personal combat attacks with Strength 5 and Damage 2. I think just in general is kind of usable enough in the same sort of way as the Sorcerer, though I'd probably rank him a bit ahead of the Sorcerer as he can actually join a squad as well as a second character. I think that one's quite a big bonus to be honest. You could have this guy running alongside, say, a Chaos Lord or Master of Possession inside a chosen unit. Could be interesting enough if you're just trying to make a really big stat Chaos Death Star type unit, and you'd rather have the on-foot version in a transport compared with Terminators maybe. Finally for this tier we've got Fabius Bile, the Clone Lord at 100 points. Again, probably best with Chosen compared with most other things. +1 strength and +1 toughness for his creations will both be deeply appreciated, and he also makes the squad a fair bit tougher as well by negating failed saves. If you use that on a high damage attack, you could well be saving a single model each time the unit's attacked. Overall a fairly big toughness increase, plus Bile himself is surprisingly tanky when you do eventually get to him, having a feel no pain type save, and then also standing up from the dead once he's killed the first time. The Surgeon Acolyte having his own profile as well is handy enough. That's another option for tanking another really big scary hit on that would have otherwise killed a Space Marine. Finally, last but by no means least, here are the units that I rank at tier 1, perhaps top tier Chaos Space Marine units. I expect to see at least a little bit more often than others in competitive lists, but I'd say that some of these are definitely a lot better than others still. Starting strong though, we've got the Possessed, 145 points for 5 or 290 per 10. Definitely one of the premier melee units of the Chaos Space Marines once more. They're pretty fast, fairly tough with their own stat line and the invulnerable save, and really quite dangerous melee that gets you devastating wounds basically at base, just every single time you make a Dark Pact, which you'll be doing every time you're fighting anyway. They are very, very scary if they take the Mark of Chaos undivided, getting to reroll all hits and wounds with 1 CP stratagems, and that is rather monstrous in combination with devastating wounds. You could get a lot of mortals out of a big unit with that. Slanesh could be interesting as well just for sustained hits melee with throwing more attacks at the enemy, plus also advance and charge with a 1 CP strat. The Master of Possession could be interesting enough to lead these as well. A 6+ feel no pain and slightly buffed movement is kind of big, particularly when they've got such good movement already. I feel like overall Possessed are a very easy unit to include in strong Chaos lists right now. Next up, and perhaps one of the more standout Chaos units in general, is the Forge Fiend, 165 points, and usually people tend to take it with a trio of ectoplasma cannons these days. They are hazardous and could cause some damage to itself, but it is kind of worth it. If you do risk the hazardous rolls, then you get devastating wounds on its attacks, which means for the ectoplasma, then you're getting 3 mortal wounds for every wound roll of a 6. Some pretty scary damage output to puncture even through invulnerable saves, or could kill multiple models at once perhaps. Again, it's a pretty excellent choice with the Chaos Undivided mark to allow you to reroll all hits and wounds for a 1 CP stratagem should you need to. Nurgle also seems to be a good choice as well. Spreading the Sickness can give you 5+ for sustained hits, as well as the option of a 1 command point can't be shot from greater than 12 inches, which is pretty annoying on a backline unit. If you don't want to risk the hazardous, you can always just not overcharge. The ectoplasma cannons are still pretty dangerous at strength 10 anyway. And just in general, these things seem to be enormously efficient Chaos Space Marine firepower right now. Very big damage output for the cost. Next up, for other scary mainline damage dealers, we've got the Terminators, 195 points for 5, or 390 for a big investment, big squad of 10. I feel like these guys are perhaps competing with Possessed a little bit for the mainline Chaos damage dealers, and all the big stratagems and synergy and character things that you can put with them. They've got lots of advantages and disadvantages compared with Possessed. They don't move as fast and they don't get devastating wounds, but they still have a fairly serious combat threat, plus a bunch of shooting as well. Plus inbuilt deep strike can be kind of interesting with rapid ingress. They do have more options for character support as well, including Abaddon himself. Again, could be another unit that's very, very disruptive to make invisible basically with the Nurgle stratagem once in the early game, so you don't get any of these whittled down too early, and have them move up to threaten some objectives so they hopefully get the first strike on the enemy before they get their numbers taken down too much. Overall, I do feel like they're a very strong unit, and I've also chosen to rank their character support in tier 1 as a result, particularly Abaddon the Despoiler, but the other options are fine as well, I think. Next up, we've got Obliterators, 160 points for 2 now, or 320 for 4. I say they maybe aren't quite as enormously stand out as the first 3 on this list, probably lower end of tier 1 or upper tier 2. But still, compared with 9th edition, they just feel significantly more efficient at 80 points each. The 2+ saves often matter a fair bit more with lower AP going around in general. As before, their flesh metal guns always have the flexibility to gun down exactly what you need to, whether it's battle tanks or hordes. Deep strike on them can also help out for mission objectives as well, say behind enemy lines or engage on all fronts and things. And I do quite like the way that they could just surprise the opponent for a turn with 1 turn of indirect firepower. If they think that they can hide 1 model and then they just turn that on, that could be kind of critical in terms of denying victory points. Overall, quite a fun unit. I probably wouldn't run absolutely tons of them in the army, but a unit or two to deep strike and chip in with some solid generalist firepower seems fine. Next up, we've got the Dart Pack support machine that is the Hellbrute at 155 points. The stat line of the Hellbrute I think is kind of underwhelming for the cost, to be honest. It's not too bad, but it's 2 plus save and either some big guns or a gun and some combat. But without its special rule, I don't think it would really compete so well against most of the other stuff. The big thing that the Hellbrute does in the battle lines, though, is it's got an aura of boosting Dart Packs. Units within 6 inches get both benefits of the Dart Packs upgrade, and due to the way that the Marks of Chaos rule is worded, it means that you actually get critical hits if you've got either a ranged or a melee mark, and the critical hits mean that you'll both get sustained and lethal hits on a 5+. If say you're a ranged unit and you've got either Tzeentch or Nurgle, or combat unit and you have Khorne or Slaanesh. Not sure if that was quite Games Workshop's intention, but having both 5s and 6s gaining both lethal and sustained hits is absolutely amazing, perhaps particularly for units like Terminators, which can get 4 rerolls to hit if you happen to be taking a Dart Pact. Seems pretty awesome to follow a Terminator brick around, or even just sit with a few firepower units and give them massively better shooting. I think it's probably not worth taking more than one, seeing as its own stats aren't standout, but seems pretty reasonable to have in the battle line somewhere. Next up, we've got the Chosen at 115 points or 230. I think that these guys have done okay out of the change to 10th edition, really quite cheap and dangerous for just essentially 23 points per model. Lots of strength 5 AP-2 attacks in combat, with the option to take a few fancier weapons. Built-in advance and charge and fall back and charge gives them a bit more threat range, and for 23 points they're actually fairly tanky as well, with 3 wounds for that cost being very good indeed, I think. They've also got good options for character support as well. Could use Chaos Lords or Masters of Possession, or Fabius Bile or Exalted Champions. Quite a lot of options there. I feel like their Mass Strength 5 melee works pretty well with a lot of the Dart Packs as well. Maybe big lethal hits and auto wounds with Khorne could be one fun way to go. Next up, we've got the big guy himself. Abaddon the Despoiler is 280 points. Has certainly changed in character really quite a bit since his 9th edition version, rather than just being an individual enormous beatstick of a model. His own personal stats just maybe aren't as enormously impressive on the defensive side, though he can still punch well in combat, maybe a bit more of a synergy piece for Terminators and the army in general. First up, he farms command points very easily by making a Dark Pact each turn. That's a good chunk of value right there. The Chaos stratagems are rather excellent. Then he's got the choice between 2 very powerful auras, either re-rolling all hit rolls for units within 6 inches, which can include some very scary stuff, or giving everyone a 4+ invulnerable save. The re-rolls work amazingly well with the Dark Packs, as it means that you can get a fair few more 6s or 5s. For some units it might make sense just to re-roll everything, say if you're trying to auto-wound a big tough vehicle on a 5+ perhaps. The 4+ invulnerable save, as we mentioned, is really nice for particularly accursed cultists. They're already somewhat tanky and have annoying regeneration already. Turning the save from a 6+1 to a 4+ that you can't do much about is pretty brutal. When he gets into combat, he does still have very powerful personal melee stats, and allows access to all the stratagems and the boosted versions of them, as he's got all the god keywords, so they will be shared with the unit that he joins. Probably the most tempting thing to do with him is run him in an enormous block of Chaos Terminators to get the best value out of all that good stuff. It does mean that you are committing to a very big unit in a list though, with like 700 odd points worth of models almost. Should be a unit that the enemy really doesn't want to get in the way of, but on the other hand could maybe be a little bit concerning if it either gets screened out or if the opponent manages to just finish off most of the rest of the army, even if he might well just dominate any one objective. Still though, very powerful model, really massive value between his own personal melee, 2 amazing auras, and farming those command points all game long. Overall, I'd probably say that those first 7 are perhaps the pick of the top tier, though I thought I'd mention a few of the other character choices I quite like as well here, and are maybe going to be more tempting than at least a fair few for competitive lists. The Master of Possession is really quite cheap at just 70 points, gives his squad a 6+ feel no pain, which is really quite nice on Possessed or on Chosen, and +1 to advance and charge is great on either of them really, particularly Chosen who get advance and charge innately, and he could do the same with Possessed with a Slaanesh stratagem. Otherwise he comes with a little bit of melee as anti-psyker 2+, plus an actually fairly potent psychic sniping attack which could just kill an enemy leader straight out of a unit, 2 shots at strength 6 and damage 3, with the option of +1 to hit and wound if you damage one of your units. Overall I think he's a fairly solid all-rounder, probably not an auto-include or anything, but seems handy enough if you do have Possessed. Chaos Lords are perhaps a bit more simple, 75 points for the foot one and 100 points for the Terminator one. If you didn't want to go the whole hog with Abaddon leading a unit, then these could be nice for either Chosen or Terminators. I think the free stratagems are by far the biggest draw to them, as the Chaos stratagems are rather great, particularly with the boosted part based on the marks. And at least compared with a fair few of the other characters, they do have quite strong personal melee, either with a Thunder Hammer or a Power Fist or something. Depending on the lord, you either get a once per game combat boost, or half damage for the Terminator one to make him tankier to kill when he gets exposed. The Sorcerer in Terminator armor is a third option for leading the nice tanky Terminators. He's 90 points, and I think the single most interesting thing that he brings is Death Hex. Cast this on an enemy unit, and then for the rest of the turn, the rest of your units shooting and fighting them get an extra buff of AP against them. It is quite short ranged at just 12 inches, but you could pretty much guarantee that it lands on something on the front line if you deep strike the Terminator squad, or even use rapid ingress to get it even closer. Could be very handy just to buff the AP of the Terminator's combat, which is only AP -2 with those accursed weapons now, but it's pretty awesome with just about any chaos shooting as well. Any volume fire is going to hit far harder if it gets more AP on it, and it could be nice to counter a unit that's got a very high save. The rest of the stuff I'd say is a little bit more peripheral. Rerolling, advancing and charging is handy enough, might save you a command point or two. A little bit of help for psychic shooting that's okay against elites, and of course has a fairly tanky profile and some combat to chip into the unit. I still probably rank him towards the lower end of this tier at 90 points, plus having some strong competition from the other Terminator leaders, but seems like quite a fun thing with that debuff. Finally, last but not least, we have the Dark Commune, which went from being kind of overcosted in 9th to surprisingly cheap in 10th, at just 55 points for this little cultist command squad. I think that's really quite cheap given the benefits they bring, particularly seeing as they're already just bringing an extra 5 bodies to the unit, which isn't nothing, one of them having 4 wounds as the cult demagogue as well. I think the single best thing that they do for the squad is giving them a 5+ invulnerable save, excellent for both flavours of cultist, and if you're not doing some sort of crazy Abaddon 4+ invulnerable save combo, this seems like absolutely standout value on the accursed ones, making them tough and giving you more chance of getting that regeneration in. Then they can double down on that by a very powerful once per game boost, +1 to hit and wound, which makes their combat go from okay to downright scary, plus also advance and charge for a turn to propel them into combat. Kind of feels like Orc War Boss is calling the war on that one. It then gets to reroll Dark Pacts and a 6+ leadership, so you're far less likely to take any damage from that. May as well use one at any time that you shoot or fight. A small Warp Curse shooting attack, which is basically a heavy bolter kind of profile, and also a tiny bit of melee as well from those blessed blades. Not too much to write home about, but certainly doesn't hurt. I think that's really quite a lot for such a cheap points cost. I think that if you're taking a big accursed cultist squad, then it's almost hard not to include one of these, at least unless you're shielding them with a 4+ invulnerable from a Noctilith Crown or Abaddon. So anyway, there we have it. Hope you've enjoyed a bit of a breakdown of some of the units that I'd say are stronger and weaker out of the Chaos Codex, though I look forward to hearing all your thoughts down in the comments. Which Chaos units have been working out best for you on the tabletops of 40k so far in 10th edition, and would you have been tempted to rank any of these higher or lower? If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or certainly keep the regular 40k things coming. I do tend to post new content just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.